Welcome to Green Hill Shadow, Chapter 3. How did we get here? When did it start? He couldn't tell. When you were kept locked up tightly in a metal room, you didn't exactly have a way to tell time. Sight. He could see well enough in the dark. After all, it was what he was accustomed to now. No light in sight, only coming on whenever a human decided to see if he was either alive or if they wanted to do something else to him. The dark room devoid of any color than what metal would give off, and maybe some of his old blood. The room had a rest to it though, years of decay settling into it. Sound. It was loud to his sensitive ears, the rattling of chains as he often shifted his body from an uncomfortable position to a more, well, just about the same in another position, echoed whenever he did so. The only sound other than his breathing. He was so tired. His body ached with pains from either testing stuff on him or just being kept in an uncomfortable, restrained position. Just another way for them to keep him humbled or humiliated. Sense of smell, inhaling the dust in the air, the smell of rust, all that mixed in with the scent of old, dried blood left on himself. He had a sense of smell like other Mobians, so he's been told, only his is more heightened. Another thing for him to be used to. Sometimes he just drifted to the dark abyss, giving his body and mind some time to rest from the everyday normality he'd grown used to. There, the nightmares lay in wait for him, the reminder of what he is, what was done, and what failure he truly was in the end. Shadow the Hedgehog, the failed ultimate life form. But, oddly, that began to quail as of late, whenever he actually slept. Sometimes either having no nightmares at all, or he began to see actual color. Flashes of green, large tall brown and green trees. Bright blue skies, more green across the land, covering giant boulders that could reach the sky. He had only ever seen landscapes like that in books, or in coloring sketches, pencils. That's it, done in colored pencils. Sounds of what he could assume were birds in the dream. He remembered someone mentioning the way birds would chirp. Shadow doesn't know when it started. At first it started with little snippets, taunting him like the humans did. He, after all, had never seen the outside. Just through photographs. They came as fast as they went, and they weren't consistent. They glitched into his mind, frazzled like a broken code on a computer screen. Yet, the more it happened, the more was shown, the larger it got, and the glitches lessened. More so, he felt like something was trying to comfort him, reaching out to him. Found. When did it start? A decent-sized emerald of green would flash into his mind in the abyss. The hum that came from it. It sounded so enchanting. His ears would stand still, listening intently in the dream. He felt a peace inside it. But when he woke in reality, with guilt in his heart, this escape from his predicament was far too comforting. It was something he didn't deserve. After all, it was his fault. No, and it always would be. Pain. That's all this is pain. No matter how much he asked for them to stop, they didn't. No amount of begging did anything. So, he stopped asking, stopped talking, and this resulted becoming more like the feral animal they thought he was. He no longer cared. That went out years ago. Human hands held him between the white lab coats, scientists, and the two military uniforms. Their firm grips were not gentle. He snarled and would fight back, even with those restraints on his body. He tried to push himself up from his knees. He turned and twisted against them. He never made it easy for any of them. But of course, it didn't matter to these people. They were determined to force him into drinking something this time. He couldn't hear them properly as they talked over each other. strange grunts with many trying to keep him still, telling him to knock it off and behave. They pulled on his restraints, the one on his neck making him choke. Those chaos trainers that were attached prevented him from using his chaos powers every day for years. One grabbed at his mouth to try and force it open, while two of the military held his head still, one making the raid to him with this strange liquid. Well, Shadow could be petty when he wanted to be, and he so didn't waste the chance at the hand on his mouth. He bit down on the hand, hard. He pierced the man's flesh with his teeth. He could taste his warm blood. Red Eyes stared at his victim in defiance and showed a maddening grin. Shadow heard his screams of agony. The humans around him began shouting. This resulted his quills being pulled painfully in all directions to shake him off of the man's hand. It only made him bite harder. His scream got louder. The metallic taste of blood on his tongue, some making its way down his throat. Such a disgusting taste. Then he felt his head being hit with a fist. But that still didn't deter him. He heard the threat. They were going to blunt his quills if he didn't let go. Still keeping an unyielding grip on the male's hand. Still tasting the awful blood. The soldier's fist kept repeating the hits, commanding him to let go. He could feel his head begin to bleed from the force, but he paid them no mind. His ear was twisted in a final bid, and that hurt so much a pained whine escaped him, but he still kept his unyielding grip. Shadow was showing them what defiance was. He may be theirs, but he would never break. Stop hurting. There it was again, that feeling. Shadow couldn't place it this time either. What is it? He then felt something sharp jab into the side of his neck, something cold being injected in. He snarled and tried to twist his head at the offender, keeping his iron grip on the human's hand, dragging the victim along with his head. The man was definitely gonna need stitches. No, not again. They injected a strong dose of that sleeping sedative into him. It was made especially for him. Will this ever stop? He vaguely felt himself being struck for a good measure. His awareness began to fade, and the grip on the human's hand lessened. Enough, the man managed to pull his damaged and blooded hand out. He vaguely heard concerned voices for their co-worker. He tried to will against it. Who knows what they do to him while he's out? He couldn't decide what was better, being awake or being out cold. He still tried to go against it, but he couldn't. Maybe this was a blessing. He won't know the next cruelty for a few hours. His world went dark, and his ears hearing nothing. Another day, locked in the room, same old story. He doesn't remember if the bite incident was yesterday or some time ago, nor can he remember what they forced him to drink. Then the pain came flooding in his senses. It made a jolt, causing his abdomen to flare up even more, and he let out an undignified hiss. They opened him up again, didn't they? When exactly? His senses began to come back now, too. He was on his knees again, arms spread at each side of him, restrained and chained, limiting his movements in the tighter ones, causing the chains to echo in the room. Of course, they do this. He rolled his head ever so slightly. His quills ached, and his muscles ached. His bruisings ached, and even his head ached. Even his aches ached. He's so tired. He could feel the bags under his eyes. But he promised he would keep going. Was it a blessing or just a curse, that promise? He groaned. Taking a deep breath, he began to hum quietly, to distract himself from the world of pain he's in. She liked his voice. That much he remembers. Quietly and to himself, he began to sing with a soft-spoken voice.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair?
He sung, vocal cords rough, giving him a slight harder time getting the words out. It was the only sound besides the rattling of chains filling the cold, empty room. Tired, half-open red eyes stared at the floor.
Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme.
He closed his eyes. He imagined how the instruments would play, his mind filling the silence.
Remember me to one who lives there. She once was a true love of mine.
Piano sounds fill his head.
Tell her to make me a comfort shirt. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. With no seam nor needlework, then she'll be a true love of mine.
Oh, he could hear it. The chords, the flutes, many instruments get louder. He hummed in tune with the music to his mind. Where did he hear the song? He can't remember. Not a soul heard him. Just the cold metal walls, alone. His own audience. Well, apart from the ever-present hum of something else. A glow of green flashed in his mind. It likes his voice too. Something's changed. He felt a jolt of energy, specifically chaos energy. It should have been impossible. The humans were always so careful in making sure he didn't have enough or able to feel any. So what made this different? You could feel his fur frizz up slightly with the power, just enough to let him do what he thought wasn't possible anymore. Golden red sparks came off of him. His ears picked up on something snapping. He fell forward, vaguely aware of putting his once restrained hands on the metal floor. His chaos trainers, the restraints, were broken. They were still attached to his arms, but it was like they weren't working. His breathing became erratic. He could feel the one on his neck still attached to the wall, keeping him from being able to fully bend. Gritting his teeth together, he gripped and tugged on his neck restraint, perhaps too hard, because it dented and snapped, irritated the back of his neck, and it fell to the floor with a heavy bang. With that gone, he was bent over, arms against the metal floor, and his fists clenched tightly. His chest heaved heavily, eyes wide, unsure of what just happened or how it happened. Just that it did. No more. He groaned, trying to catch his breath. That feeling again. A tug. It was becoming a pattern. Child. He paused and let out a small scoff. He was not a child. He was never a child. He was a weapon. The familiar tune in his ears disagreed, however. Getting his breathing under control, he swallowed, begging his aches to quell for now. Red Eyes quickly looked around the room. He began to force himself to stand, and his legs gave out, causing him to hit the floor, and he let out a sharp gasp. His hand drifted to his abdomen from landing on it, and he could feel his eyes water. Well, off to a good start. Worried, the sound might have triggered the human's attention if they were watching him, forced himself not to acknowledge the pain and embarrassment from the first attempt. He got back up. His legs were shaky, granted. He could feel the adrenaline kick in. Eyes became like pins as he made his way to the door. He grasped at it, but it didn't budge. So he looked at the electronic on the wall, seeing numbered buttons on it. He remembered the code the last human he watched punched in, and so his fingers fumbled about, hoping his memory proved correct. His heart racing, the sparks around him starting to get a little intense, ears twitching in all directions, trying to be vigilant. He felt another tug, telling him to calm. Well, that's easy for it to say. The door opened and he rushed through it into another metal room with tables, observation notes scattered around, and filled with equipment that he dared not even look at. He was only here for one thing, his shoes. They could keep whatever else of his, the samples, the blood and whatnot, but he was not leaving without his shoes. The professor made them just for him. He looked around in the dark of the room, trying to spot them. Odd. No humans were around at all. His ears listening for any footsteps, and with rapid movements, he raced about, and there he found them. Locked away in a light gray metal cabinet. Why were these humans obsessed with the color gray and metallic things? He didn't have time for a key. A white coat could appear at any given moment. He gripped the cabinet and pulled with as much strength as he could muster, upsetting his abdomen and his muscles from the strain, sending painful jolts up him, but he paid no mind. He could hear the metal sharply in his ears, but his focus was on the shoes still. His heart rate increased, breathing became erratic. The sound surely would have gotten someone's attention. He yelled in frustration and pulled again, and it bent to his will, finally breaking it open, and the door went flying into the table, creating more loud noises. Metal screeching on metal. A computer fell over, creating another bang. He fumbled, grabbing his shoes, and he held them tightly to his chest. Swallowing, he felt his strength drain and his legs quivered. No, please, no, he can't. Not now. His sparks bouncing off him. He was losing control. His anxiety screamed. He had to get out. He had to get out. His eyes shut tightly. He tried to visualize the arc to calm down. Just something. But he felt something pass into him. Instead of the arc, it was the greenery in his dreams that came into visualization. Trust. He felt like something take over, instincts that were not his own. Words he never heard before, and he uttered them, and felt a warm sensation into his body. A light enveloped him. 1 second he was on solid ground. The next, he was maybe a couple feet in the air. How? Well, his landing could use some work. He fell from the air and landed on some type of crunchy texture, like ground right on his left arm and side, unintentionally upsetting his laceration, and his golden red sparks exploded out of him from the pain, and he screamed. His shoes fell out of his hands and went flying somewhere. He grasped at the ground below very hard with his right hand, twisting his body instinctively from the pain, and his eyes shut tightly. He could just feel the water gather, threatening to come out. Sharp gasps of pain. His energy was all but gone, but from that burst. He tried to will his eyes to open, but he couldn't. He was being hit with all sorts of smells and noises, and it was overwhelming him all at once. His conscious mind began to lose awareness, however, either from the pain or the energy being sapped at once. Maybe both? No. Stay awake. He tried to will himself. He doesn't know where he is. Please, he can't afford to be caught after all that. Too bad his adrenaline was losing the battle as well. The familiar hum came back and began to lull him. No, he called out again. He begged, don't do this to him. Safe. He could hear footsteps coming closer, and he couldn't get up even if he wanted to. And with that, Shadow lost consciousness over exerting himself from years of confinement from the humans, the tests, and of course the rough landing on his already aching body. The energy explosion had hit him all at once. He was dead to the world. Shadow doesn't know when he began to hear the voices, ones of shock and concern. He felt unseen hands lift him, and his ears could make out a heartbeat. Was he actually in a safe place? He felt something placed over him. It felt so soft. But he couldn't react. He lay there, in the darkness, surrounded by its waters, but never going under. And that seemed to be consistent in the darkness. Unable to react. He was vaguely aware of strange sounds, and finally, his eyes fluttered open a little. His vision was blurry at first, but began to focus. He noticed a spinning fan above him from a white ceiling. Wait, white? Not gray or metal? That's new. Opening his eyes more, he turned his head to the side. What is he exactly on? It's not a lab bed. Too soft for that. Why was everything so soft? His fingers felt the blanket and looked down at it. It's warm, comfortable. Where was he? It was bright. Lighter, but he couldn't quite place where the light was coming from. His brain tried to catch up with the events from before. A realization sank in. His shoes weren't on his feet. They were bare as usual. He sighed solemnly. They must have dropped out when he landed. Maybe he can go find them once he figured out where he was exactly. He heard a snore. That made him freeze. He wasn't alone. His eyes turned and his breath got caught in his throat. No. 2 humans on the other side of a low wooden table, on the ground on some mattress, asleep. A male and a female, hugging into each other, their backs facing him. He could feel the despair start to rise. He had been recaptured again. All that effort was meaningless. He felt his eyes begin to get hazy. But something fluffy moved at the corner of his eye. His red eyes gazed over, and he had to blink. On an odd-colored chair asleep was a 2-tailed yellow fox. That's a prize shadow. Is that a Mobian? He was sure foxes did not have 2 tails, but he could be wrong. But what's one doing here, with humans? Was he captured like himself? But where were the restraints on the fox? He was so focused on the yellow fox when a gloved hand shot out of nowhere, hitting the edge of the thing he was on, scaring the life out of Shadow. He felt his heart in his throat from that, so he forced himself to look down, somewhat to see a blue hedgehog. He could only stare. Another snore sounded. It came from him. Right, there in front of him was another hedgehog. He'd just never seen one. Drawings and studies, sure, but never one this up close. This hedgehog was all over the place in his sleep, with some type of blonde-hairy animal in the mix. Not a sapient like Mobian that he could tell. The hedgehog snored again, head closing onto the wooden table leg, his legs entangled with said animal blanket, and his other arm was held up against the thing Shadow was currently laying on. Quills all over the place, and a little bit of drool going down his muzzle. It was a comical look. Then the color red entered his view, a hulking red Mobian. He's never seen a creature like him. Large gloved mitts, 2 spikes coming out of them. Absolutely muscled, but not overly, indicating he worked out. No visible ears that he could see, but long quills or locks hung from him and a strange-looking tail. Is he another form of hedgehog? He watched as this one bent halfway down to the slumbering hedgehog, chuckling at the state of him, and proceeded to move his head back to prevent him from hitting the table with his forehead. Something must have gave him away. His head tilted towards Shadow, and purple eyes locked onto his red ones. The fur began to rise on said creature as he stayed in the bent position. Neither made a move. Neither let out a sound. A staring contest started between them. Knuckles did not want to admit how unnerving those red eyes were. It was like looking at dull gems, but still unnerving. He took in this hedgehog, lean limbs like that of his blue brother, but clearly has muscle that Knuckles could see, at least on his arms. Neither budged in their staring, and neither reacted to sonic snoring, the only sound other than breathing. And so Knuckles decided to make the first move.
Greetings.
The hedgehog did not respond to him. He looked surprised, his ear flickering ever so slightly at his voice. Perhaps he was unsure of what to say?
You are currently in our dwellings. Welcome to the Wachowski tribe.
Knuckles tried again, still in the half-bent position, not keeping his eyes off the hedgehog, and neither blinked. Again, no sound came from the hedgehog. Could he perhaps not speak? Or did he not want to? He could see curiosity in his red eyes. He heard shuffling sounds from behind, his parents moving in their sleep, and with that, the hedgehog's eyes did finally move. Anne could see his eyes shrink. His hands tightened on the blanket. Curiosity exchanged for fear. Knuckles felt the change shift in an instant, and that made him frown. He finally moved from his position, seeing the black hedgehog's ears twitch in his direction. The cat a firm but fear look on his parents. Knuckles was many things, naive perhaps a little. He was still a trained warrior, and years of observation of his opponents gave him an insight to people's body language, especially their eyes, the true gateways to one's feelings. Eyes often betrayed his opponents, unable to mask a trained poker face unless you were a master. Years of training perfecting the mask. And the hedgehog's fear was natural. Strange place, waking up to strange beings. But that only applied if the fear didn't look like he recognized what they were. He was not that naive to not notice this hedgehog recognized what his parents were. So he must have come across a human at least once. A bad one, perhaps? Or did they try to capture him? Is that why he had restraints on?
They are humans, but not harmful. Not to us.
Knuckles pointed out, stressing the not harmful part in hopes of it reaching the hedgehog. He could see the hedgehog did not believe him. He pressed his lips into a fine line. The hedgehog did not want to speak, perhaps in fear of waking his parents up, or just in general.
You may speak, Black One. Some of us are still in sleep's warm embrace.
As if to give him an example, Knuckles nudged Sonic ever so slightly with his socked foot, causing the blue hedgehog to let out an undignified loud snore in his sleep.
This one's gaping fish-like mouth is proof.
The monkey has tails wrench.
Ah, see? My brother has no fear in that department.
Knuckles said in a soft-spoken voice, being mindful of his surroundings.
I am Knuckles Wachowski.
He banged his fist, not loudly though, against his chest in greeting. He could see the hedgehog's eyes drift to Sonic slightly, then himself. The fear, understandable, was still there. But the curiosity had also come back to an extent.
What is that, Wachowski?
The black one said, quietly though, and looked afraid at the own words that came out of his mouth. His eyes shrank a little from the realization. His voice was strained, rough-sounding. Knuckles noted, but his own purple eyes lit up a little at the question.
It is a last name, a family name.
The hedgehog was sinking that information in. He wondered what the hedgehog was thinking about, so he waited for the hedgehog to speak again. But more silence came from said hedgehog, who, not wanting to speak any further, he looked absolutely nervous.
Wait there.
Knuckles stated, drawing the hedgehog out of his thinking, and picked up the water from the table that was left for him in the middle of the night, gone lukewarm by now. He made his way out of the living room. Shadow swallowed, his gaze seeing the humans in full force again. His beating heart thumped against his chest, and the anxiety was making him feel ill. He put a shaky hand to his head and groaned, urging himself not to be sick. The light from his dulled inhibitor rings made Shadow's eyes drift to his arms, seeing bandages for the first time. That's when he noticed his restraints were gone. He blinked. He wasn't imprisoned on his thing.
Ah, yes.
The sound of Knuckles' voice broke through Shadow's train of thought. He glanced up slightly from the hand that might belong to his view of the red one, who was holding a glass of water in front of him.
They have been discarded, Black One. They shall weigh you down no longer.
He then held the glass out for Shadow, who stared at said glass, like he isn't able to understand what Knuckles wants him to do. Undeterred, he spoke again.
Would you like some water?
Well, that made Shadow blink in confusion, and Knuckles picked on that, but did not comment. Instead, he let out a small hum and leaned over to place his other hand under Shadow's head, who flinched unintentionally at the near contact, making Knuckles pause in his actions as his eyes narrowed. Shadow felt absolutely small. He swallowed the rising bile, and he focused on his own hand, not willing to see the expression on the red Mobian.
I apologize for breaking any boundaries you may have, my friend. Hold your hand out for me.
Used to humans instructing him what to do, Shadow held out his hand out on command. Still unable to look at him, he felt the cold being placed in his hands, and Knuckles gently pressed his own against Shadow's, easing the glass to not only sit in his hand, but to lie on his chest so it had support underneath.
Please drink at your own leisure.
He pulled his mitt back and stood straight again. Shadow then understood. He was wanting him to drink the liquid, his eyes drifting to the water, seeing a couple of ice cubes in it. He hesitantly sat up slightly, pulling the glass to its lips, and experimentally took a sip. He felt the cold in his mouth and go down. It felt so good on his throat. His ears turned forward, and he took another gulp, not realizing how thirsty he was. It did nothing to help how sick he felt, but if he had enough, maybe it would make it go away. He pulled the glass away from his mouth. He wiped his mouth with his other hand, then felt the red one's large mitt take the glass from him gently, setting it on the table behind Shadow's head.
Don't drink it all too quickly. It may cause you to be sick.
He was gentle with Shadow, patient even. Maybe he was safe with this one around.
Shadow.
The red sempient paused before turning his attention back to him, purple eyes on him, surprise on his face, not expecting him to speak. Shadow swallowed.
My name is Shadow. Shadow the Hedgehog.
He snuck a glance at the red Knuckles, who gave him a grin.
It's an honor to meet you, Shadow.
He proudly stated. Shadow couldn't help but have his own small smile. He certainly was an odd fellow, this Knuckles, but not in a bad way. Obviously, he was breaking down Shadow's uncertain and nervous walls, little bit at a time. It's obvious to Knuckles that he's had little socialization with others. Isn't maybe like Tail's situation? His unusual coloring may have made him an outcast, much like the fox was with his two tails. Tails hadn't spoken about his village, so Knuckles could only leave much to his imagination. His eyes caught Shadow's looking at his own hand, making a gesture to his chest the way Knuckles had, mimicking, perhaps. It made him chuckle. The sound made Shadow stop and look sheepishly at him. Knuckles pounded his chest with his fist in example once more, not overly loud, but being proud in it with a grin. He waited to see if Shadow would follow suit, and he did not disappoint. Only his was more meekish, unsure, and not fully touching his own chest. Still, Knuckles puffed his chest out with pride at him, attempting to follow an echidna greeting. It seemed to have lessened the uncertainty. Unfortunately for Knuckles, his father's curse, one he never believed existed, decided to show up. Tom always said something always happens. It's the law of the universe. It would pick when it decided to hate you.
Morning, Knuckles.
A voice yawned out, his father's voice specifically, causing the tension to come back into the room very quickly. Knuckles believes it now. He could just feel the fear rise in Shadow once more, and he went absolutely still. Knuckles tensed. This was either fight or flight reflexes in the hedgehog's demeanor. Knuckles had moved in Shadow's line of sight as his father sat up from his mattress. The echidna turned his head to the side just a little and rose mid up in front of Shadow, almost like a hold sign, but it was more so to comfort the hedgehog. Knuckles can see where Sonic gets his timing from. Unfortunate curse.
Good morning, Father.
He spoke in an even tone, still the same softness. Shadow's eyes shot towards Knuckles quickly, a questionable one that screamed, "What?" But Knuckles was undeterred, still, eye on Tom, and stood still for Shadow. Tom ruffled his hair from the sleep, letting out another yawn, pushing the blanket off himself, revealing his plaid white shirt and navy shorts.
No graceful wake-up call for me or Sonic today?
Tom began to rub the sleep out of his eye. His own voice wasn't that loud, just like Knuckles, aware of the sleeping people in the room, at least just unaware of Shadow being awake currently.
I did not want to disturb our guest with Sark's personality. It may have overwhelmed him.
That's probably a wise idea, bud.
Tom chuckled, and he finally opened his eyes and took a look at Knuckles.
So, any requests for breakfast? Also, don't stand over your brother like that. You might give him a heart attack, and the last thing we need is him startling the newcomer.
Tom started to get up.
Slowly, father.
That made Tom freeze midway. He looked at his oldest, raising a brow. Then he spotted the black hedgehog, awake, licking like a deer caught in headlights. Oh, yeah, the universe hated him.